So here's a problem where we're going to be using percents and decimals in our strategy for solving this. And in fact, there are two possible ways of solving this. Both are equally good ways of solving it, so you can choose whatever method you prefer, whichever one you find easier. And here's how the first method goes. The first method is proportions. So we're gonna study something called proportions. Proportions. This is when two fractions are equal to each other. Two fractions. What fraction? Well, in this case here, we're talking about a class of 80 students, and we're talking about a percentage of them being girls. 40% of them are girls. So if 40% of them are girls, and I can write this down as 40 out of, you guessed it, percent means 100. So 40% means 40 out of 100, and this fraction is supposed to be equal to some actual quantity of girls, which we don't know, out of 80. Why 80? Because that's the number of students in the class. So the total number of students in a class is 80. How many out of those 80 are girls? I don't know. So 40% means 40 girls out of 100, but we don't have 100, we have 80 in a class. So how many of those are supposed to be girls? So you see we've got two fractions that are supposed to be equal to each other. All we have to do now is find the numerator that goes above the 80, and we're done. So the method of cross multiplication works like this. The number that is underneath or above the question mark moves across the equal sign, upwards and across. So not on the same level, this is not right, upwards. And once it moves across and upwards, it multiplies. So this is cross multiplication, cross mult. So it goes across and it multiplies. So 40 times 80, let's write that down over here, 40 times 80, well that gives us 3,200. So that's 3,200 over 100, over 100 equals, and now that we're left with just the question mark that's on the side, there was, once upon a time, there was an 80 over here. It's now gone, so I'm going to erase that. I'm going to erase that because the 80 moved over. And so to find the value of the question mark, the number of girls, remember that this represents girls. If we can find the question mark here, we know the number of girls. And to do that, all we have to do is divide 3,200 by 100, because this fraction is really a division. So if I divide 3,200 by 100, I get that the question mark is equal to 32. That means the number of girls equals 32. There's 32 girls out of 80, out of the 80. So if I'm looking for the boys, well, I've got 80 students. If I take away the 32 girls, what I'm left with should be boys. So 2 take away 2 from 0, you can't do that, so you have to borrow. That's 7, that becomes 10. 10 take away 2 is 8, and now 7 take away 3, that's 4. 48 of the students are boys. So this is our first technique for finding out how many boys are in the class. And there is another technique. I'm just going to shrink all of this. I'm going to shrink it. Whoops. And shrink this. Okay, that's a mistake. Let's shrink it better. Do a better job at shrinking this. And let's move it over. Let's move it over to the side. And now let's work on the second technique. The second technique goes like this. 40% of the 80 students, 40% of the 80 students are girls. 40% is just 40. Let me write that down over here. It's 40 out of 100. which, if I divide, the decimal point moves over twice to the left because I'm dividing by 100. There's 2 zeros. And if it moves over twice to the left, I'm left with 0.40, 0.40. So 40% I can rewrite as 0.40. The word of is multiplication. 80 is 80. So 0.40 times 80 students gives me how many girls there are. Girls. And if I multiply that on my calculator, this will give me 32, which is what we found before. So if we find that there are 32 girls, then we can take that away from the 80 students. 80 take away 32 girls, and that leaves us with 48 boys, which is what we found before. So this is a second way of finding out how many boys there are. This time I didn't use proportions. What I did is I converted the percent into a decimal, and then I followed what the text says. 40% of them being the 80 girls, the 80 students in the class. Of is multiplication, so I multiply, and that gives me the quantity of girls. So I know I said that there were 2 ways of solving this, but it turns out actually there are 3 ways. Let's minimize this a little bit, move it to the side, and let's do a third technique. So here's the third technique. The third technique is, well, if 40%, I'm going to write this in blue, if 40% of the students are girls, 40% are girls, then how many are boys in percent? Well, there could only be 100% because you can't have more than 100% of something. So then in that case, what's left over is 60% are boys. So if you add 40% to 60%, that gives you 100% of your class. So you get a total of 100% of your class if you add the boys and the girls, which makes sense because your class is made up of girls and boys. So if 60% of the class is boys, then we do 60% of class, which is 80 students, equals boys. Now you can do the decimal technique, or you can do the proportions technique from before. I'm going to do the decimals technique again. 60% is 0.60. Of means multiply. The class is 80 students big. So if I multiply those together, then 0.6 times 80 is, you guessed it, 48 boys. Those are the 3 ways of solving this problem.